All right, so I'm going to pull up chapter 18, and I want to spend some time on that. And Ms. Johns, can you see your screen even though you don't have the camera? Can you see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. All right. So it's just a camera issue.
Yeah.
Okay. So the reason I want to spend a little time on this is because there's this popular misconception in the law that when we go to court, right, and we file a lawsuit and we request damages, we can get as much money as we want. In reality, that's not the case. We're limited sometimes by statute. Other times we're limited by the area law, and contracts is a great example of that. Okay, and we can't just go to court and plead and say, hey, even though this was a $500 contract, I want $1 million. That's not reality. Okay, so how do courts look at contracts or damages from contracts? The courts look at damages involving contracts and what were you promised under the bargain? What were you supposed to get? And where did the other party come up short? And so, you're promised, one thing, but you get another. And so the court has to then figure out, well, you were promised this, but you got this. And so how do we reconcile those, right? How do we award you damages? And so you have to plead in your complaint, in your completing your what we call the prayer for relief. You have to request your money damage. You have to say, well, how much have you lost? So I wanted to go through today and I want to look at monetary damages and I want to work the formula with you. So monetary damages, this is the most common form of judicial remedy for breach of contract. And the reason for that is most contracts, even if they're between two non-merchants, most contracts, it's just a business deal. And so it's not about, emotional suffering or loss of consortium or any of those things. It's simply a cost benefit analysis. What were you promised under the deal and what did you get? All right. So what we're going to look at, or if we think about, there's two types of compensatory damages. There's two types of categories. First, we have the loss of value. What was the value that you were promised minus the actual performance? And then the second bucket is the expectation interest, the value of the bargain. So let me give you an example. Let's say a roofer comes and puts a new roof on your house. And as part of the contract, the roof includes, or excuse me, the contract includes the fact that the roofer has to put down an underlayment of tar paper. It includes the shingles, the nails, the gutters, and the drip edging. But when the work is done, you notice that some of the drip edging is missing. You notice some of the gutter is missing. And then you have someone come out and inspect it, and you notice that some of the tar paper is missing. Well, we would say, what's the loss of value in the sense that, you spent $15,000 on the roof, $10,000 of it was supplies, but yet you were shortchanged $1,000 on supplies. So what was the loss of value? You paid 15, but what you got was 14. So your damages would be what? You were promised 15, but the job and the materials are actually worth 14. So what are your compensatory damages? I'll just take a volunteer.
1,000.
Yeah, $1,000. All right. Now, what we're not factoring in there, though, is if somebody has to come out and tear up the old roof and put down the tar paper and then put down a new roof. Now we can say, it can get very expensive, right? So it may not be that simple. All right. So here's the formula that we need to master, all right, when we calculate compensatory damages in a breach of contract lawsuit. What is the value of failure to perform, meaning that the person fails to do it, or the person does it, Ms. Nags, and they come up short, i.e. deficient performance, minus the cost avoided, i.e. in red, and then plus the incidental damages? What happened? All right, what was the result or the damages suffered by the breach? So if you think about the roof case, right, the value of failure to perform or deficient performance was what? It was $1,000. I paid 15, I got a $14,000 roof. All right, there's really no cost avoided. We'll talk about cost avoided in a second, but plus the incidental damages. So this is where it gets tricky, right? You have to have a company come out. They have to tear off the old roof, put down the tar paper, and then put down a new roof. And so the incidental damages in that case may be $9,000. So even though your total compensatory would be 10,000, but the deficient performance would be 1,000, but then your incidental damages would be 9,000. So 9,000 plus 1,000 is what's 10,000. All right, so cost avoided would be the loss or cost the injured party avoids by not performing. Sometimes, folks, guess what? There's a benefit to non-performance. I'll give you a great example of that. Before you guys came to UT Martin, McDonald's closed for the summer to remodel. They were closed June, July, and August. And good news, Mr. Mitchell, Labor Day weekend, McDonald's was going to reopen. Now, here's the thing. Why do you think that McDonald's closed to remodel in June, July, or August? What was their logic? And I'll take any volunteer, not just Mr. Mitchell. Why would McDonald's and Martin close in the summer, Miss Nags?
There's not as many college kids there.
Exactly. The population of Martin goes from 18,000 to 12,000. So I would say McDonald's probably sees a 20, 30, 40% revenue decline during the summer. And so they closed during the summer to do the remodel so that they wouldn't lose as much money. But now, do contractors and construction contracts, do they always finish on time, Ms. Nags? They never finish on time. So the construction lingered on until like October. And so McDonald's was closed all September and October while the college students were back, and no one could get to the value meal, all right, or the value menu. Now, as the father of 3 young children, this was a lot of fun because my kids love to go to McDonald's like all kids, and we would drive by, Miss Emerson, and they'd say, Daddy, is McDonald's open yet? And I'd say, no, it's not. I'm sorry, they're not open. No McDonald's for you, okay? So I had a lot of fun tormenting them all summer, and then September and October. And then even when McDonald's opened, they said, Daddy, McDonald's is open. Can we stop? I'd say, no, those are just the workers. They're still working on it. And they said, but Daddy, there's people in the drive-thru. I said, I think they're testing the equipment, right? So even well into November, I told my kids McDonald's wasn't open, all right? So anyway, that was fun, all right, because as a parent, you every once in a while you have some type of slight retribution or payback to your kids. So, but anyway, so Walmart was closed. What do you think their damage? I mean, so their damages as far as deficient performance, right? What did this cost them? Was loss of revenue in September and October, right? Which is probably a pretty substantial sum of money. What were the costs avoided? What would those be? And look at our definition. Loss or cost the injured party avoids by not having to perform. What were the costs avoided? What do you guys think? Sounds like somebody is tuning in. What are the costs avoided? So if McDonald's is not open, the owner doesn't have to spend money. And what does the owner not have to spend money on? Miss Ballard, you were getting ready to chime in, and then you clicked off. You were real brave. Come on, what doesn't the owner have to spend money on? Think about it.
Is it the inventory?
Well, first, inventory. What else? There's other things.
Employees.
Employees, labor. That's probably the highest cost McDonald's has. Their most expensive cost is probably labor. So you don't have to pay anybody. And then what else? There's another big one. You guys do it every month. What do you pay every month?
The cost to operate?
Well, like the cost to operate. Yeah, so go ahead. Expand on that, Ms. Ballard.
So like the bills, in a sense?
Yeah, so think about utilities. Electric, water, sewage, all right, cable. They have TVs in McDonald's, right? All right. So they're able to avoid those costs or a lot of those costs. So we think about, so what's the deficient performance? Well, we lost $2 million or $1 million in revenue. I don't know how much this McDonald's makes, but they would have to prove that if they filed a breach of action lawsuit. All right. And then what would be their cost avoided? Labor, inventory, utilities. All right, and so the incidental damages would be their loss of revenue. That's what would arise directly out of the breach. And then lastly, consequential damages are not arising directly out of the breach, but guess what, folks? They're a foreseeable result. Now, think about this. I like to think of damages as links in a chain. Our first link is the breach. Our second link are the incidental damages. It's the damages that spring directly forth from the breach. Then our third link in the chain is our consequential damages. They weren't foreseeable, but they're a result. And then lastly, when we get out, Ms. Ballard, to the fourth link in the chain, those damages are what we call unforeseeable. All right, they're unforeseeable, which means that, you know, you can't plead them. And so they become too speculative. And so one of the things that you have to show in a lawsuit for breach of contract when you request damages, you have to show that it was foreseeable, that those damages were foreseeable. All right, so let's work a problem. All right. So here's our formula: value of the failure to perform or deficient performance minus the cost avoided. And then let's look at loss of value. Okay. And this is a pretty easy calculation. That's the difference between what you were promised and what you got. So this is the simplest way to calculate compensatory damages. Jacob sells a car to Joe, expressly warranting 45 miles a gallon. And it's a Prius, all right? So, Miss Emerson, you're in Jackson. You have to come to Martin a lot. You buy the Prius, all right? You think it's going to get 45 miles a gallon. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, all right, the Prius only gets 20 miles to the gallon. So if the car got 45 miles to the gallon, it was worth $24,000. But because it only gets 20,000 miles to the gallon, all right, or excuse me, only gets not 20,000 miles a gallon. Boy, wouldn't that be great? All right, 20 miles to the gallon, 20 miles to the gallon. The car actually is only worth 20,000, and so the value of the car is $4,000 left. What are your damages? What are your compensatory damages? $4,000. All right, so we call this the benefit of the bargain, right? What you were promised is not what you got. It gets more complicated though when we start talking about failure to perform. Okay, and let's look at an example here. So there's our formula. I put it in here every time. So Deborah loses $400,000 in revenue because widgets are not sold due to Busy Bob's breach of contracts. As you guys remember, we abbreviate contracts with a K. All right. So Busy Bob's says, Deborah, I'm not buying the widgets. There's no market. Deborah says, well, wait a minute. You ordered 400,000 of these, or $400,000 worth of widgets. Bob says, I'm not buying them. So now, unfortunately, because of that loss in revenue, Deborah has to shutter part of her manufacturing facility. She has to close part of it down, close the machines down. All right. Her cost avoided, she saves in the month that she's forced to shut everything down, she saves $80,000. So her lost revenue, all right, or her incidental damages were $400,000 minus her cost avoided. What does that put her damages at?
320.
Exactly. All right. Her damages are $320,000. So in a lawsuit, in litigation, she would establish that, yes, we had this contract. It was going to produce $400,000 in revenue. But at the same time, as part of the discovery process, what would come to light is the fact that she saved $80,000 in utilities, inventory, and labor. All right. So her incidentals were 400. Her cost avoided was 80,000. All right. Same hypothetical. All right. Value of failure to perform a deficient performance minus our cost avoided plus our incidentals. Deborah loses 400,000 in revenue, right? Busy Bob's breached the contract. She saved $80,000 because she was able to shutter that part of the factory. That put her damages at $320,000. But Mr. Kennedy, now several employees that she really needed that were highly skilled have left the company. They've taken jobs with other companies because they've been furloughed because of Busy Bob's breach. She now has to hire a headhunting firm to replace those individuals, and she spends $20,000 to go out and recruit 5 more of these highly skilled employees to operate these machines. Is that foreseeable, you think? Is that foreseeable as far as, and not just Mr. Kennedy, I'll take anybody. Is that foreseeable as far as damages? So we think about incidental, these would be what we call, what type of damages? These would be, go ahead, Mr. Hobbs.
Is it consequential damages?
Yeah, these would be consequential. So at the time when Busy Bob breached the contract, it wasn't necessarily foreseeable that she would lose employees and have to hire a headhunting firm. But she can establish, through, depositions and other evidence, she can establish that this is related to the breach, that it directly springs forth or arises out of the breach. And so if her lost revenue is 400, her cost avoided is 80, that's her, and then her consequential, as Mr. Hobbs so eloquently put it, her consequential are 20,000. What does that make her damages? What are her damages now at this point?
340.
Yeah, exactly right. So now she would plead 340,000. And the court's not worried about, like, well, we got to punish Busy Bob. He's a bad guy. I mean, as long as Busy Bob wasn't engaged in any type of fraud or illegality, there's not going to be any punitive damages. There's not going to be punishment. What the court is going to look at is merely a business cost-benefit analysis. What were you promised? What did you get? Here, you were promised 400,000. You didn't get it. What are the damages? Okay. All right. Let's take this problem up a notch. All right. So we've got our Deborah loses 400. All right. Cost avoided, she saves 80. So it's not all bad. And then, as Mr. Hobbs pointed out, we've got 20,000 in consequential. She then has to hire a headhunting firm. All right. Which puts her damages at what? 440,000. All right. Or excuse me, not 440, 340,000. But now let me ask you this. All right. It should be 340, not 440. But let me ask you this. Because of the stress of this, Deborah files for divorce. Her and her husband split up. And Deborah's been very successful. And her net worth is about $5 million. Her husband has underachieved in life, unfortunately. But because it's community property and she's been very successful, he gets half of her assets. All right, half of the community property. So Deborah's husband gets 2.5, and she only gets to keep 2.5. And all this is caused by the stress of the breach. Can Deborah claim that $2.5 million in damages? Can she claim that? What do you guys think?
It sounds like unforeseeable. Like it doesn't really have to do with the original thing. Like you can't connect it like 100%.
Yeah, so if we think about Ms. Nags, our chain, right? So we have the breach. We then have our incidentals. All right. We then have our consequential damages. But when we get out to that fourth link in the chain, and then the further we go out every link after that, guess what? It becomes more and more unforeseeable. And so, what Busy Bob's lawyer would claim is he'd say, look, Deborah's marriage was on the rocks long before this. Yes, this didn't help things, but there's no way that my client knew by breaching this contract it would put such stress on Deborah that her and her husband's marriage was dissolved because of it. So I agree with you, Ms. Nags. It's just too far removed. It's unforeseeable. All right, it's unforeseeable. So the rest of this presentation is very straightforward. All right. And so I feel good about it. All right. As you look at reliance damages, punitive damages. But I wanted to go through and I wanted to hit this specifically regarding the formula and how do we apply it and how do we calculate damages. All right, compensatory damages. Any questions, observations, thoughts?
So will the math on the test be simple enough, like the numbers simple enough when we don't need a calculator?
Well, here's the good news. Unlike your accounting classes where we need to have down to the penny factored out, $700,422.07. The nice thing, Ms. Nags, is the math on the exam will be nice round numbers because I don't let you have any outside materials or resources, i.e. no calculator. So the good news is we'll be playing with nice round numbers. Does that make you feel better? Yeah, it makes me feel better. And I'm not taking the test. I'm just writing the test, but it makes me feel better. All right. So don't sweat that. You'll be able to do the math, but you do have to understand the formula. You do have to understand incidental damages, and you need to understand consequential. And then think about our example for unforeseeable. They're just too far removed. They're past that fourth link in the chain. All right. And so the farther we get out, all right, the more likely it is that it's unforeseeable. Okay. And so one of the elements that's required when you plead damages in a lawsuit, guess what? They have to be foreseeable. All right. We can't have speculation. All right. Any more questions about it? All right. So that wraps up chapter 18.